Hello and welcome back to my Java tutorial series. Today we're going to be learning about methods. What is a method? That's a question you might find yourself asking. If you're not familiar with programming prior to this series, then of course you won't know. So let's ask, what is a method? A method is really no different than a variable. So I will use the same analogy that I used in the variable episode, and that is a method is really just a box. Our box stores a type, just like a variable does. Our box can have a name. But then what do we put inside of our box? With a variable, you just give it a number or some letters, or maybe a Boolean statement. But with a method, you can store far more than just a single value. No, methods can store a series of instructions that evaluates to a given type. And that given type is the one down below the box. So methods are a series of instructions that you've given a name to. And you can call that series of instructions by that name without having to rewrite the same instructions over and over again. So if we look at this example in actual Java code, you'll see that we have a method, and this method evaluates to an integer, and it's called getUsersAge. Each time this method is used, it will print to the console, what is your age? And then it will return that value to wherever you've called the method. So whenever you need to throughout your code, you could call this method in order to retrieve the user's age once again. So now, let's look at some examples in IntelliJ. Okay, now in IntelliJ, we can look at a few examples of methods in action. So this here is just stock main class, and this, which you should now recognize to be, is a main method. It's a method that we've just named main. And that's because it's the first method that runs in your code. It runs there by default. But we can create other methods that main calls, so we don't have to put all our code in the same spot. So let's look at an example. So we can create a new method like this. Now there's some new things you don't recognize here. The first of all, static. Static just means the main method can call it. For now, I think that is an adequate definition. And void. Now remember back to when I said you can make these any type. When a method doesn't have a type that it returns and you just want to have a set of instructions without returning a value, well, you make your methods return void. And void is essentially just nothing. So you don't need a return statement in methods that return void. We're going to name our method print. And a new thing, once again, inside of these parentheses, inside here, you can take parameters. So you have input data, and then you also have output data. So we take in a string, and we call it s, and then we print s. So let's try it out. So if we run print hello world, and we run this code, as you can see down at the bottom in the console, it printed hello world. But we can do a little bit better than that. That's a pretty basic example, and it's very useless considering the fact that print is built into Java. let's try printing a game board, for example, which is a more adequate use case, I think. So if we make a new method and we call it print board, and it just needs to, we need a couple print statements. Let's say this is a tic-tac-toe board, for example. So we'd probably want to space these out a little bit. Just give it some space, and then we'll just print 3 of these. So now, if you were writing a tic-tac-toe program, for example, instead of writing this every time you wanted to print the board, you can just call the print board method instead to save you some time. As you can see down here, let's try a few other examples. Last episode, in the looping episode, I explained a simple programming problem called FizzBuzz. And if you didn't watch the last one and you don't know what FizzBuzz is, basically, you have to loop from 0 to n, which can be any number within the 32-bit integer range. And you have to tell if the current number is divisible by 5, 3, or both. And if it's divisible by 5, you print buzz. If it's divisible by 3, you print fizz. And if it's divisible by both, you print fizzbuzz. And what we can do to improve our answer from last time is to write a method for it. So we can say static void, and we'll name it fizzbuzz. Fizzbuzz is going to need n, because that's the number we're going to be looping to. So now we write for, and we're going to do I in range of n, and we're going to check if it's divisible by both. And if it is, we'll print fizzbuzz. And if it's not and it's divisible by 3, well then we'll print fizz. But once again, if it's not, then we'll print buzz. And last but not least, we'll print I if it's not divisible by any of them. And essentially how this works is the modulus operator that I went over a little bit in the operators video is just getting the remainder if you divided I and 3. And if the remainder is 0, it means they're multiples of each other because they divided cleanly. So this is a much improved answer over the previous one, which was just a for loop running in the main method, because now, when we call fizzbuzz, we can put in any number we want without changing the loop. So we can do from 100, or we can even do thousands, hundreds of thousands. As you can see, it ran. And scroll up, it went from all the way from 0 to 100. We can try 1,000, but I think it's a little small. 10,000, 100,000, million, 10 million, 100 million. There's 100 million. It's a little bit of an increase in size. As you can see, it's running. It takes a little while longer to process 100 million numbers than just, well, 100. But as you can see, it's running through all of the numbers through the loop. And this is one of the many examples of how methods improve your code, because now you can take input data and you can put output data just like this. This is a fundamental cornerstone of programming. I'm going to stop this before my computer lights on fire. And I think I will end this video here because You should be able to understand the gist of methods by now. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this makes programming a little bit more fun.